Thank you, Lynn. Welcome, everyone. Hope you're having a good first day morning, as the old friends used to say. I'm not aware of any announcements. Um, does anybody else know of any? Okay. What about joys and concerns?
Well, I don't know whether this is a joy or a concern, but it just came to my attention the other day when I had to run Drake somewhere that he is now in 4 bands. And this one has nothing to do with school, and he plays the guitar. So I'm on the road again.
Chip the roadie.
On the road again. Well, it's a joy that all the dogwoods are blooming like beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Yes, our heritage lilac. I think the shoots came from over at Nancy's mom's. It is very fragrant this year as we're driving around it.
Troy and I had to go to North Webster yesterday, and they're still having spring, and it was cold. I had to have a sweater on, but it was just beautiful.
Well, much to be grateful for, much still to be concerned with in this world, especially, uh, well, maybe not especially, but certainly Palestine and Israel, uh, and the spillover into our political discourse here. The campus unrest reminds me very much of almost 60 years ago, and some of the things to see armed police on campus and breaking up demonstrations and the vitriol on all sides? How can we work to bring peace? It's kind of like Lori's question, how can we be assertive and humble at the same time? How can we intervene in such a way for peace that doesn't turn us into those who would yell and scream about our side? I mean, that's always part of it, how to remain centered in this world of conflict and yet make a difference. Well, that began to sound like part of the message this morning, except it's not. So let's take a few minutes to hold these things in God's light and love, and then I have a brief message to share this morning as I feel led. I don't know why, but I've had, when it's been my turn to lead worship, at times I come up with a kernel and it seems that that's the direction it's going, and then it never seems to fully come together. I really wrestle with it, and excuse me, I was wondering, I'm reading a novel of early friends in the 18th century moving from Philadelphia area to North Carolina, and thinking about those ministers who weren't supposed to prepare at all, just be so steeped and then led by the Spirit that they stood up, and some of them could stand up and speak for an hour, and it's like, good heavens, they must walk lots closer to God than I seem to be. I wonder what some of their listeners thought at times to messages that long, but then it was a different time. But today, we'll see how this shakes out. And I'm going to start with scripture reading from the 18th chapter of John. And it's when Jesus has been arrested by the chief priest and that group, and they have hauled him before Pilate. And it begins in, you all know the story, but I'm going to start in verse 36. And Jesus tells Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then?" said Pilate with an exclamation point. "You're a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of the truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. Well, there's times I've always thought Pilate got sort of a bad rap. But I empathize with that retort. If you read the sections before this, you realize that he's been subjected to what I would consider some first century political ads. The religious authorities primarily who are campaigning against Jesus and saying all sorts of things. What is truth? I mean, in this primary time, we are just inundated with ads saying all sorts of things. I'm strong against China. And then right after that comes an ad about that person who just said that, and it says he does business with China and he invests there. Another one, I oppose teaching that America is racist. And then about an ad about that same person by an opponent. He was honored for his diversity and hiring practice. Now my grandfather was a preacher. Somebody else responding to him, he's a liar. Another one, he's a Democrat in disguise. And that same person says, I have the endorsement of President Trump. Now, I have to admit, all these come from Republican ads, and that's not because I'm picking on the Republicans per se, but this is Indiana, and there really aren't any Democrats running in the primary and running ads against each other. I'm sure that that will all change as soon as those who are going to be running in the fall are chosen and they start campaigning against each other, and we'll begin hearing those right away. I remember how soon all this stuff started this year. I mean, way back at last election, before we'd even voted, all these primary ads were starting to come out saying things about the other. Each of these ads, of course, is meant to persuade us, to change what we believe. Just like all the other truths that's out there. I mean, on the internet, Facebook, all kinds of things. There's anti-vaccine, there's pro-vaccine. There's stories of undocumented immigrants bringing in disease and crime and being mental patients. The earth is flat, whatever. Even various things put out by different stripes of Christians. We're getting all this information, but is it true? And how do you know what's true? And people are warning about misinformation. A recent ad for a satirical news show that I don't watch anymore says American misinformation is the best information in the world. I think, yeah, that's kind of how we act at times. Ours is the best. Everybody has the truth and is trying to persuade. But as research shows, the old adage is sort of true. Don't confuse me with the facts because my mind's already made up. Most of the ads only speak, as the old black preachers used to say, they're just preaching to the choir, saying what's not changing anybody's mind. But that old adage is it turns out really true, at least according to some research that I read in a recent article in the New Yorker called How Gullible Are You? In brief, the researchers found that what people take to be factual and what they fervently espouse are often two different things. It's like we can all agree that a chair is a chair. That's factual. But the idea of belief and what we believe in has become more fluid. It used to be people said when they said they believed in God, they meant they really believed that there was a God and lived their lives according to what their understanding of God's precepts are. But today it says the things we fervently espouse are often two different things. That even goes for religious people. We may say we espouse something, but don't do it. But they're saying also that misinformation is one of the leading risks in the world unless we learn to become more discerning, which not many of us seem to be. The good news is that for all the misinformation out there and the rhetoric it expires and the people on either side who seem to espouse it and believe that that's true and it's either really good or really bad, few people act on it. I don't know if you remember the Pizzagate conspiracy a few years ago where there supposedly was some bad stuff happening in a pizza place in Washington, D.C., and people were all riled up on one side about it and how awful this was, et cetera, et cetera. And then a fellow from North Carolina actually took a gun and went there. And one set of researchers said, well, that just proves how misinformation gets people riled up and they do bad things. But actually, as they looked at it, they said for all the rhetoric, only one person did anything. And so we'd like to get head up and talk about this or that, but we really don't do anything about it. Dale Kahn of Yale University says, misinformation is not something that happens to the mass public, but rather something that its members are complicit in producing. Misinformation is not something that happens to the mass public, but rather something that its members are complicit in producing. And I wonder what that says about us. What are we complicit in producing? Information or misinformation as people of faith? So I go back to Pilate's question and then two other queries that kind of follow along with it. The first is, what is truth? Jesus says in the earlier statement that he's come to bring truth, and those who recognize it will listen to what he has to say. So am I discerning the truth? And second, am I telling it? So the first one I want to just follow up a little bit with, what's my responsibility as an imperfect follower of Jesus to really sift what I hear and discern its veracity? So much is out there coming at us. How do we determine, what's your guideline? What's my guideline for determining what's true? I try to set some tests for myself, and part of it has to do with looking at whether it's consistent with what I think the Bible says about the message of Jesus and how we're to live. Is it peaceable? Is it loving? Is it for social justice and the care of all people? Those are a few of my guidelines. And then to dismiss it, and the whole idea of sifting is an early Quaker concept to test what's being sifted and see what's left. To let as Jesus talked, let the chaff blow away and the kernel stay there. What is true? It's not to say we can't learn from things that are being said, especially from people we may not expect to hear the truth from, but to be careful listeners, to be careful discerners. Not because we want to be politically astute, but because we want to be faithful followers of Jesus. And the second is, what's my responsibility as an imperfect follower of Jesus to make sure what I say is true? We Quakers have long held that one of our testimonies is that of integrity and truth-telling. Being truthful was one of the things that helped us in times of persecution. People would know we weren't going to change our story and so forth, and that we could be relied on to say what we felt was true. Our word could be trusted. I remember, and I probably told this story a time or two, but going into Westminster Village in a retirement community in Muncie where I had lunch with some of the senior adult women every month who lived there. And Dottie Bump was escorting me in, and one woman who was a resident said, "Dottie, who's that young man you're with?" And she goes, "Oh, that's my pastor. He lies." And I said, "I prefer I tell stories." And she goes, "Same thing, according to early Quakers." Well, that's true. They weren't big for fiction. But to say what we mean and mean what we say and be careful about the truth. What's my responsibility to do that? And also to avoid what Edgar Burrow advises against, being dragged into needless discourse, striving as party versus party of men against each other, hoping to win the argument. Well, I've been argumentative in my life, and I like to be right. And I like everybody else to know that I'm right. And I'm slowly learning that that's not really very important in this day. And part of mine responsibility as an imperfect follower of Jesus to make sure that I say what is true and not be swept away by emotion, not to be swept away by what I think is right, but to continue to test and know when to hold my tongue. I think these are times that really call for people who are discerners of the truth and speakers of the truth. And to speak the truth carefully, and by that I mean with care, filled with care. Martin Luther, who was far from being a Quaker, once talked about his beliefs and said, "This I believe, God help me." And I think that should be an approach we can take. This I believe, God help me. Howard Thurman, the great black preacher, used to end his sermons with a phrase something along the line, "This I believe to be true. It may be. God help me." But that sort of humbleness, I think, is how we should approach discourse in this life, especially in these dangerous times. to be sure of what we believe and to speak carefully and lovingly, to let God apply any correction that needs to be done, in hopes that we might win some with winning ways of love, as the old hymn says. That's a tough task for me. I'll leave it up to you whether it is for you. What is truth? Asked Pilate. In this day of shifting truths, let us cling to the truth of the gospel of Jesus. Let us love God, walk humbly, and serve one another.
When Brent emailed me this week about what he was going to speak on today, he said, "This is the topic I'm going to share about, and this is the hymn I'd like you to play first, but I don't really have a suggestion for the closing hymn, so you pick something." So this is what came to me as I thought about what I was anticipating him to share with us. It's on page 417 in your hymn book if you happen to have it close by. The title is "Let the Words of My Mouth," and it's based on Psalm 19. These are the words. "Let the words of my mouth and my heart's meditations be acceptable to thee, O Lord. In thy sight may my heart's meditations be right. Let the words of my mouth and my heart's meditations be acceptable to thee, O Lord."
Thank you, Lynn. Let's continue on with unprogrammed worship for those who can stay and to those who need to leave and travel. Please be safe, and we hope to see you next week.
You've given us lots to think about today, Brent, and I really appreciate that. As I think about having conversations with people, there's always the conversation, of course, that's going on, but in the background, in my head, are some other questions that are swirling around. And one of them is what I want to share the truth, or is it just my truth? The older I get, less and less falls into the truth category, and more of it seems to be my truth. There are things, of course, that are truth with a capital T, but maybe not as many as I used to think. But the other conversation that's going on in the back of my head is whichever category what I want to share falls into, the truth or my truth, how do I share it in such a way that it opens up conversation with the other person rather than shutting it down? And that's where this hymn that I played comes in, I think, is that my prayer is that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart can be acceptable to God, and that if so, then how I share whatever it is that I want to share can be heard, and hopefully open up conversation. I was talking about the truth, or some of the misinformation that gets batted around is a real challenge for all of us, and certainly for me. Thank you for sharing what you did today.
If hearts are clear, we can close meeting for worship for this week.
Thank you, Brent.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was excellent.
You all. Well, I'll
I'm
see you later, Brent. I'll see
Yes,
you
well,
all.
I was going to say, for those who want, Lynn in particular, Jonathan, I'm not sure can make it in time. At 11:45, we're going to meet at Three Agaves for lunch.
I told Steve I would bring lunch to him out in the field.
Okay.
So
All righty.
I have to figure out which
There.
he's in and then what he wants for lunch.
Okay. Well, I guess it'll be the three cousins at Three Agaves.
The three amigos at Three Agaves.
CC, Senora. Okay. Well,
Good to see everybody.
have a good week. Take care.
Bye, you too.
Bye.
Bye bye.